WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. Let's build an accessible WordPress page and post with speaker Peter Ingersoll, WordPress builder, maintainer, and trainer, Ingersoll Interactive. This presentation was recorded September 27th, 2023.
Welcome back to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. My name is Laura Adamonis, and I'm a website designer with my own agency. I volunteer as a content creator for the training team at learn.wordpress.org. I live in North Carolina, and I'm originally from Chicago. I have a passion for UX, UI, and accessibility. Today, thank you for joining us for Let's Build an Accessible WordPress Page and Post with Peter Ingersoll. Peter has been working on the web since the beginning, where he was lucky enough to be part of a small group to develop online access to Connecticut's major newspapers. While working in marketing and communications, he developed technical skills to connect and share information pulled from various data sources. That led to a career creating websites for other companies. While initially working in Cold Fusion to build his own CMS, Peter discovered WordPress at version 3.0, wow, and hasn't looked back. Peter currently builds and maintains sites for a variety of clients with a focus on nonprofits. He is the co-organizer and presenter for the WordPress Hartford, Connecticut meetup group, which is an awesome group. Peter considers himself an advocate for DIY WordPress site admins and non-coders. In recent years, website accessibility has become an important part of Peter's always developing skills. You can often find Peter in various WordPress meetup groups, online discussions, and lurking in several Make WordPress teams. With being from New England, Peter's favorite food is steamers and lobster with and he emphasized lots of butter. He is also a big 80s music fan. Any Tears for Fears or Cars fans out there, welcome Peter. Oh, please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A, which you'll find at the bottom of your toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees.
It's nice having Laura introduce me, as we spend time in a variety of meetups, online meetups and groups and things like that. So when Laura told me that she was going to introduce me, I was like, oh, a friendly face and someone who will have my back and make sure I'm keeping time here and all. So we're off to a good start. I'm going to jump right into things because we've got a lot to cover. Like always, I bite off a big chunk of this, but I thought, it's very, very important that there is a practical approach to all this stuff. I know there's a lot of great presentations, fantastic presentations, a lot of great demos, but I always want to make sure that, people who are building and managing their own sites aren't overwhelmed by things and can figure out by just starting at a certain level and pace and what to pay attention to, that building an accessible website doesn't have to be a big scary thing. It isn't. It's really just a matter of developing the right habits when you know what to pay attention to. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to be building an accessible post. I've prepared the content, which is unusual for myself because a lot of times I do things on the fly. This time I tried to do things a little bit more because the clock is a ticking. But as we go, I'll spend time on certain aspects and then kind of bring things in a done way as we cover a few different aspects of this. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go right into building an accessible post demonstration. Right now, this is just a blank post. I'm going to edit it. And Laura, also, you can tell me if zooming into the screen helps. I will have to probably zoom in and out. So I'm going to start bringing in content right away from my my demo site here. And I'm going to bring it in in such a way that it's already formatted, and I'll walk through kind of some of the things that are already formatted and done. I was going to do this as we go, but I thought it'd be better just to kind of bring these things in. My slideshow is actually the post that we're building. So I thought, as we're building this post, we could have content that's specific to this particular presentation. And I'm going to show you a few of the things to pay attention to about this, and as we get into some of the details. So we went kind of an introduction about creating a post in a very short amount of time. Laura did a great job of kind of covering a little bit about me. We are in the WordPress editor right now. I'm using the block editor. For this post, I'm using only core blocks. And when we get to the page, I'm going to introduce some blocks that are not core from a block package. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the first things to start noticing, and we'll get into the detail about this, is in the organizing of content. A great thing to use is looking at the outline mode. It's great, but quite honestly, there's some development I think could be done to it, because it looks at headings only from a core block thing. So I'm going to point out some of these blocks. This is my introduction is an H2 heading, and it helps organize the content. So you can see the title of this document, of this post, is Build an Accessible Post Demonstration. That's the title that I pre-set up. And I just brought in this content where I have a heading set to H2. So you see the H2, a paragraph, a little bit about me, introducing it, and then a subheading under the introduction, a little bit about me. So that's set to a heading of H3. So now we're starting to organize right off the bat the content that goes into a blog post. I've got links to content, and one of the main things to look at when you're putting links in is to avoid having links that open into a new page or a new tab or a new window. People like to do that. They want to make sure that readers are always coming back to their site. But for somebody who's using assistive technology, keyboards, can't see the screen. When they get put into a different window or tab, it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the process that they use. And quite honestly, I, like many, I use the back key, or if I want to post something, if I want to go to a link, I'll right click it and say open in a new tab. I want control of it. I don't necessarily want the person who's defined the web page to define that. We're going to get into some of the details about what I'll cover. I'm going to bring that content in right now. Let me cover that. Copying and pasting between different documents is pretty straightforward. The easiest thing is to use the list view, which shows this list view has become great for managing content. You can see the layout of your paragraphs and image. I'm looking very forward to in 6.4. I'm expecting to be able to set groups and set the name of the group right here in those views, so that you can really do a great job of organizing content. I'm going to go to the bottom of what I entered, and then I'm just pasting in. See, I didn't copy it right, so I'm going to undo that. I was pasting the same content. Let me copy. One of the tricks in copying is not to do a Control V or a Control C, but rather click the copy button. I'll show you that. So what we will cover to here, just to reveal, this is the content I'm copying from. So you can see I've highlighted that. I'm going to copy this content, copy the blocks. And then when I go back over to this page, now I can paste those in. So now I have more content. So what we'll cover the goals: quickly create WordPress posts and page review accessibility topics. We're getting into detail. And by the way, this site, as I post it, will be live. It's under accessiblewp.org, and the homepage will link to the content that we're editing. Obviously, we can't get into a huge amount of detail here with this presentation, but there's a lot of great Accessibility Day presentations that apply kind of directly to some of the things we're talking about. And I highlighted some of those here. Each one of these being a link that will open up on this page. You can see my link colors. My links are underlined. They're a different color for the link. They're bright. I do have a hover color that is also, these are meeting contrast requirements, which is something you want to pay a lot of attention to. We'll get a little bit more into that. So let me go back and grab a little bit more content as we do this. I'm going to move this out of the way, and now I'm going to grab a next section here. Sometimes it's easier just to go to a section and even just add a paragraph, for example. But in that paragraph, then you can paste it. Little tricks that you use sometimes when you get stuck in the block editor. There's sometimes you just kind of get muscle memory of doing things like, entering a paragraph and then posting it, or hitting your slash to enter a block, that type of thing. The assumptions, this is important. We are using an accessible theme. I'm using the Cadence theme. People know that I do like the Cadence theme for a whole lot of reasons, but in this particular case, I selected the Cadence theme because the Cadence team, Ben Rittner specifically as the head developer, they've been really paying attention to accessibility. I've seen, and I've actually put in some feature requests that then I saw applied to the theme. So that's really, really important to me, the fact that a theme developer is paying attention to accessibility. So in the repository in wordpress.org/themes, you can filter by accessibility. There's filtering accessibility tags, but keep in mind that many excellent accessible themes do not have this tag for various reasons. One is they may have developed it before the accessibility tag became as prevalent as it is now, and there's a process to go through that not everybody has gone through, but it doesn't mean that the themes are not accessible. It's a great starting point, that filter, but themes like Cadence, like Generate Press, Astra for the most part, last I checked, Blocksy. These are classic themes, not block themes, that they use the customizer, but they are very friendly to accessibility, which is really important. But the main thing is, like anything, be sure to test your theme. We pre-selected colors that work together. Color contrast meets accessibility guidelines. I believe there's a presentation on that, but in any case, paying attention to the web aim contrast checker and a tool that I like, the color contrast grid. Maybe at the end I can show some of the details of this, where you can look at the way colors work together and what is compliant. I've only got a few active plugins, not all of them being used right now. Like Generate Blocks is active on this site because I'm using it for a different page for presentation. But the accessibility checker, new Windows warning, Cadence blocks, again, all free versions, screen reader, text format, and WS Form Lite are being used in this. So, these are the types of things that are here. Now, one of the things to pay attention to is I've got images here. So let's talk about alt text. We'll talk about it in a little bit of detail now, but we've got some pictures, some images here. So if I highlight the picture of me, the caption and the alt text are give context to the image, but the alt text is meant to be, to somebody who can't see the image, what is the image of? Describe the image. How do we make it the same experience for that person as for anybody else? So a headshot of a 60-year-old white male with salt and pepper beard and dark hair smiling at camera. Well, that's me, but then my name is the caption below. You'll see it in another section of this, but this is not about SEO, keyword stuffing, or any of that kind of stuff. It's all about making the experience equal for everybody. and includes if somebody can't see the image, but they want an idea of what the fact that there's a photo on the screen. Very, very important to pay attention to those types of things. I'm going to add my next group of blocks. Let me grab from here to, this is where I do wish that sometimes the editor had a little bit more description. We're getting to, when I say the editor, the list view, because as I look over, I'm bringing over right now probably more than I want, but that's okay. We're just going to work right through the content. Okay, so let's get into some of the key considerations for accessibility. Many of these things we can't go over into great details, but I'm posting this kind of content. This is content that is brought over in an ordered list. That's where we have the numbers. So lists are, again, they work really well in WordPress for accessibility as far as any feedback that I've gotten, when used properly. And so in this case, it's just kind of a numbered list. A list is read out in screen readers. It's, organizing content so it's easy to scan. Very important to look at. We have different ways of taking in content and different cognitive abilities, neural divergence, all the issues that, can make content easier or harder to take in. We can help with the way we organize content. So, these key topics of keyboard navigation, content structure, alternative text for images, the color contrast we talked briefly about is tied to the theme. Start with a good theme, you're good to go for the most part. Pay attention to the colors as you go. Responsiveness, making sure something works in mobile. Most people use a mobile device, in the world more than the desktop PC. So making sure that if your site's going to work for everybody, then having it work on mobile is so very important. Testing, always checking the site. These are all very important kinds of things. There are people covering topics of like automated testing versus paying attention to. So one of the key things to really pay attention to, and one of the first kind of easiest things, is use your keyboard when looking at your site. So the importance of keyboard navigation. Why is it so important? It's a mobility issue. It's a screen reader. It's being able to help people work through your content by tabbing through your content, and having your site work properly because you've organized it, because you're using headings the right way and links the right way. You have a theme that isn't hiding where the focus is of something. We'll take a look at that in a second. I'll update it. We'll take a peek at this page so far. I mentioned the headings, that heading outline. As we're building this, I'm using all of these, again, are core heading blocks, H3s. My topic of key consideration for accessibility, it's an H2. You can see the outline on the left, building as we go. And that is the proper nested use of headings. So your title, H2, H3s are under H2s. A new section. I always liken this to, freshman high school essay writing and developing an outline and things like that. There's a logic and an order. If you were to write an outline before the document, that's what you're looking at, and the proper way to use the headings. So really looking at those and kind of keeping those in order are important, because it's all about making something when you're using a site, is everything where reacting or working in an expected way. There's a logic to what you're doing, because when you have people who have different ways of using your site, the more you can apply a structure to it, the more it makes sense, and people know where they are and what to expect as they go. So that proper ordering that is so important. The image and the alt text, I'm going to grab the next couple of links here. I'm going to copy this block from my source. Let me paste that. We kind of talked about that, but this is something that kind of trips up people too. is, and when I showed my picture, I had it, but the differences between images and alt text. Alt text is used to describe what an image looks like, and there's better, longer ways of doing it, but the alt text describes, what the image looks like. Whereas, the caption might give you the context for what something is. And there's some key things to pay attention to is, as someone's using a screen reader, they're a lot of this, this content is coming at them. So being efficient and not verbose is kind of important. And also not giving description or alt text for things like decorative text. That's important because, again, now if you've got lots of icons and it's describing what each icon is, as opposed to maybe what that icon links to, that's different content. But in the demonstrations that I see, and many done by our good friend Alex Stein, when he goes through things and when he sees icons, he goes, don't put alt text on icons because it slows down the process of going through the content. So in this image, my alt text, I've got a description, which is the caption, but the blind woman at computer using assistive technology might be a good, we could get a little bit more verbose, but not too much. I can get descriptions that might be wearing a green sweater and sitting at a desk, a green colored desk, something to that effect. The icon here, I've got no alt text, and WordPress is done in my testing, and it does a good job of giving the null value for when there is no alt text. So basically, in a screen reader, that's skipped over, which is different than having no alt text in there. You need that alt tag. WordPress puts it in for us, but specifically for decorative, we don't need the alt text. And then things like when you have a graphic that has words in it, you want to include those words in your alt text because, we're looking at it, we're reading the words in an image. So reading the words in the alt text, if you can't see the image, is very, very important. So far, let's take a look at what we've got. I'm going to view this post. And here's what we built so far. And yeah, I shortcut a lot of the process because I have to in the amount of time given. But, one of the first things is I'm going to hit my tab key. And when I look at the tab key, well, the one problem is, you have to, when you're in the admin, and the trick is I often open the sites in, let me do this, a new incognito window. Open that here. And now when I tab through, you can see my first link is a skip to content if I already know the navigation. Then my focus is clear to me. It's outlined. Going through each link, it's outlining it. A lot of times you might work with somebody who says, I don't like the way that looks. Well, the focus is not for you to like the way it looks. It's to help everybody be able to use the site. And for people who are using a keyboard to know where they are, it's very, very important. The drop down is a good example of what Cadence has done, where they've made the drop down work nicely, where you can specifically go through the drop down, escape out of it. Not all themes do that. Continue from there. Now, when I get into the content, you can see where the focus is. My links as I'm highlighting. So this is reacting with the keyboard the way we want it to. I also do a quick test, for example, in using Wave, which is telling me right now we've got 0 arrows, 0 contrast errors, some alerts to pay attention to. Wave, you can go to the website itself for Wave. I'm using a Chrome extension and get some details on what some of these alerts are and what to pay attention to. These make sense without going into the details of it, but possible heading is looking at my heading information and the title of the site and going, wait a minute, is that the heading of the site as opposed to the heading of the content versus the main H1? You can see my links here. My headings clearly organized. You can look at the structure here and have that make sense. So all of these things, as you're building the page and kind of checking on it and going, okay, are things in the right order? Are things as expected? Another thing that's kind of nice, like about another plugin, sorry, Chrome extension called Tably. And when you click on that, what it does is it goes through your site and it's going to tell you where as you're tabbing through, so you get an idea. Now, this is going in a logical order. You can see it. We just tab through. I mean, one of the best things is just do it yourself. But tools like this do help you kind of see how your site is logically organized, which is very, very important for accessibility. Coming back to the content, I've got a little, I do have another active plugin that kind of hides that admin bar. So when I'm doing demonstrations, it just kind of gets it out of the way. I'm going to bring in my last bit here of content. I don't think you can hear, but my cat is outside the door screaming. So, the one thing, and we'll come back to this, but, if you start with a good foundation for accessibility, including themes, colors, and fonts, creating consistent, accessible content is not too difficult. It just becomes a new habit. So now let's take it one step further. All right. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to view this post. And while I'm calling this up, have there been any questions that we can handle so far on just kind of, I'll show you two more things while I do this that I forgot to do, which is going back to the post. I am going to put in going to make sure that the categories here make sense, which is accessibility and presentation. And I am going to set a featured image. I think we'll go with this one. And we do have alt text preset. You could do that when you're uploading images to your image library. You could always change them. And once I have that, we'll update this. And now, again, we've added it. Defined by the theme, how that image is coming in, how these additional links and what details that they go to. So let's go to here. And now I'm going to go to, keep an eye on the time. Okay, we're going to do this pretty quickly, obviously. I'm going to build a page. Now you'd think that'd be bigger, but we're going to show elements. And now I'm going to start introducing, some custom blocks, or not custom blocks, some block packages, specifically in this case, cadence blocks. These are the free ones. Again, there's so many good block packages, but the real trick would be, how do they handle accessibility? I like cadence because it gives me additional controls for accessibility. It gives me the ability to do proper titling and use ARIA text and things like that, things we're not going to get into right now. And this one other thing, I'm going to go back here because I did want to make sure that we're highlighting on the posts what I just did, because I didn't show this yet, but as we were going, I do have the accessibility checker plugin loaded, which is great. High-Rise Digital and Amber, this is their team's tool, and it really is an excellent tool that's showing me as I go the kind of content that we're dealing with. One of the things when I first, and I think this is an important note, when I first put this together is the reading level, because a lot of the content in my first pass of this was ChatGPT written, and I didn't tell what reading level. It came in at above a 12th grade reading level, which also required other a summary level and something to make it simpler. That's not good. Again, it's not good for anybody. The great thing about accessibility is it's good for everybody when you're really paying attention to. So being reminded as you're going through, do I have any contrast errors? Do I have any other specific errors as we're going through? See, this is actually showing the same errors that the Wave tool showed. And then am I staying on track on the reading level? All fantastic tools. And then if I were to look at this on the front end, I love this new ability to turn on the accessibility checker on the front end, and then look to see, some of those aspects when you get into the the specific issues to pay attention to. It kind of walks you through the things to really look at. So again, you have to look at it yourself, even though you go through the tool. So I just want to make sure we covered that really quickly. All right, so building the page, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring over a hero element. Now, this hero element is made up of, and you'll see a lot of these things are cadence blocks, including cadence headings. And I wanted to demonstrate this because while the outliner works great, what it doesn't do is it doesn't see headings from blocks that are not core heading blocks, even though they use the H2, H3, H4 heading just describe element, the CSS element that says this is a heading. I hope that happens, because the problem is when you look at it, even though this is set as an H2, this is set not as a heading. And this is, again, one of the reasons why I like in Cadence, you have something called the advanced text, text advanced, which allows you to set up the heading if you want, do things in the right order, but it also allows you to say, use all the features, but you're going to set this as a div, and then you're going to control all of the colors and things like that, which makes some of these more advanced block packages work without saying, I want it to look like a certain, I want it to be larger here, so I'm going to make it a heading too, even though that doesn't make sense in the order. And that is a trap that many people fall into. You drop in something, you go, I want this bigger, so I'm going to increase the heading size. The heading numbers, H2, H3, H4, are not for just formatting. There's a formatting element, but to say I want large text, so I'm going to use an H2 in an area where an H2 shouldn't be used, you kind of need to pay attention to that. So right now, my outline on the front end anyway, and on the back end isn't showing. When we go to the front end, we'll clearly be able to see how those headings are. They have what's called a button, but it's actually, there's a whole pay attention to what is a button versus what is a link. And a button is something that is meant to make an action on the page, submitting a form, and we'll have that in a little bit, versus linking to something else. You can make a link look like a button, but it isn't marked up in HTML as a button, because that has a certain implication through things like screen readers that we don't want to have happen. In this particular case, this is really just a link. I can show what the link is, even though it's formatted a button. Another option is what I very often use is just the headline, the advanced text, which kind of falls into the headline category, but using a div and then formatting it to maybe look like a button if that's what I want. On the back of this is a row, and the row has a background image, but it also has a white overlay set to a certain percentage of opacity. This is 100% opaque. This is lower. You want to pay attention to these based on, does it make sense the image is there? And are we still having enough contrast between the lettering that we have here and the image behind it? And in fact, you could even put background color behind certain text to even further call that out. So paying attention to, excuse me, if you have a dark background with lighter text, but maybe there's some lighter areas, maybe putting a shadow behind the text, there's different ways to increase that contrast. But just making sure that you are paying attention to that color contrast. And another little tip is to make sure that the background color, because while you have a background image, you can also have a background color that you're setting, is also the same light color if you have dark text, or vice versa, because often the tools are reading not the image, but the background color. And that's important because somebody may even not even be showing the images. And you want to know what that background color looks like, even though you have a background image. Going back to my content here. I'm going to bring out a few more. So tempted to hit Control C, and it doesn't always work the way we want it to. Copy the blocks. I'm going to bring them to here. Let me bring the checker. The checker so far is telling me that I'm in good shape. Paste the additional blocks that we've got here. Here is a heading text set to H2. Now I'm organizing it. Again, this is using the cadence blocks just to show, again, it doesn't necessarily show up in the outline. However, you can see that the next area down, areas of focus, I did set that as a core heading, and now we can see it shows up here. So that's just something to pay attention to, what is or isn't there. So don't rely on that completely. One thing to think about too in terms of accessibility is when you center something versus left justify something, think about reading skills levels, the width that you have, and try to keep things a little bit thinner, larger text in a smaller area. For folks who have a little bit trouble with reading, scanning, dyslexia, there's a lot of ways you can help people with that by the way you organize this. But again, the benefit is you're making your content easier for everybody, easier to scan, easier to read, easier to go through. Here's a classic area where the people have with kind of the 3 sections and images and links to, and often this is where you might find a link being a button. These are not buttons, these are text links. They can have, and right now we're using, this does use a cadence, the heading, that same heading, so I can have the advanced text that actually is. I can put an icon with it. It's built into this particular block in this block package. I am keeping the text left justified just because, again, it's easier in some cases. It will center. You can see that at the top I've centered that area. But as I build this content out, I've got things that make sense where they are. I have alt text for these images here. In this particular case, I am only linking at the bottom. In some cases, you can link from the title and so on. But also keep in mind, if you're a screen reader and you make everything a link, that link, it's going to read all of them, read out the same ones. And in a lot of cases, what you're trying to say is, let me present you a section, and then if you want to go to it, let me present you and go to it. So you're not inundating users with links and all. So again, something to be aware of, and I'd rather have you make a conscious decision that you do or don't do something than to just say, well, we always do it that way. So let me get on that. I'm going to update this. Let's take a look at our score. And look, we're doing great. I've got 7 warnings here. I'm at a 12th grade reading level. I'm not sure why that's the case. We'll have to take a look at what I've got in here that might look at that. I'm not going to, I didn't think in my demo I had that, but that's okay. That's okay. We're working through this. Let's continue. So I am going to let me bring over the rest of the content so I can walk through these sections. Another trick too, if you're not exactly sure the best way, and you want to say, okay, I'm on this row and now I want to add after. The add before or add after, or another way that you can kind of quickly put content where you want it. Let me paste everything that we've got here. Did I paste the same content? I did, because I hit Control C again. Copy blocks. There we go. Okay, so again, if you're building out a page, you've got, in this case, I've got more text. I'm making it narrow, making it easier. And now here's where I've got, that's my reminder to wrap it up here. Here's where I've got another section with some decorative images. These images, I don't have any alt text because I don't want to describe swirly, breaking orange and blue image. It adds no value to somebody who's, but this is an H2 because it's a section I've got. This is a form that I've created using, in this particular case, the WS Form Lite form plugin. There are a lot of great form plugins, Gravity Forms, Fluent Forms I use, that have paid a lot of attention to accessibility. They give you clues as you're building. WordPress is giving you clues as you're building that says, oh, this color on top of that color, that probably doesn't work. So having those clues come through, fantastic, excellent tools. So again, starting with some of the right things. In this case, the WS Form plugin, using the light version out of the repository that's free. It's worth going for the paid version, but we're going all free today. And in the form, making sure that you've got your labels properly posted. You're not just relying on a placeholder. You can focus on each piece of content and clearly help somebody know that I'm on a form. Here's a field to fill out. The field is name. A lot of times when you are testing a site and you go through one of the testing tools, you'll find that forms are notorious for throwing errors, but it's because when folks are designing them, they're designing them for a certain aesthetic without necessarily designing them for functionality. And that's kind of a key thing that we're looking at when we're talking about building something in accessibility. I've also, moving a little bit further down, I'm using the social icon block, core block. I put the icon blocks in here. One thing I do want to show you is if I have a block of text here, and at one point I had a number of texts, but I just want to show you this text here. There's a great plugin which I shared in the other post. I have to remember the exact title, but it allows you to hide text from a screen reader. Let me go up here. Like say, I didn't want to show this piece of information to somebody who's reading it, but it might make more sense in a screen reader, maybe a little bit of extra detail. For example, like I might say, hey, there's a lot of links here, just to be aware. Somebody who could see it could see there's a lot of links, but maybe you want to share that. There is that when you install this plugin, you do get a screen reader only. It's like formatting it just like you would go through any of these where you highlight it, whatever. But now you're saying, make this screen reader only, and it becomes invisible to people who are just reading the screen as opposed to using a screen reader, actually visually looking at that screen. So that's a neat little plugin for when you want to have more information, again, to make it helpful as somebody is going through screen reading. The thing about the social media text is block is you can show the labels. In this particular case, the labels are a bit much for design wise. We do run into a little bit of contrast issues with these two colors here, the light blue and white, the light green and white. But what I'm also showing you is that the text associated with it does get read out in a screen reader, which makes this again useful because now it says this is the link is to Peter Ingersoll on WordPress.org, Pete.Ingersoll on Facebook. So instead of just being a link, it does read out where you're going to. So again, tools that make everything very, very useful. We're doing great on the accessibility tool. Let me view the page. This is what we built or pulled together. And then again, if I were to take a look at this in a incognito window and run some wave against it as one of the tools, I am getting that. Yeah, I'm getting 0 errors. I'm going to see going through this tool that I do have contrast errors, and it's what I expected. It is my 2 links down here. It's often easier, by the way, if you turn off styles, which also gives you an idea of, again, what a screen reader is reading. And this is where it's showing the very specific screen reader contrast errors. But that is a lightning round of putting together 2 sites without going through creating each and every block as we did. And I think we're set at this point.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey, I came in.
That was awesome. And Please, if you have any other questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll start our Q&A segment.
Fantastic.
All right. I actually had one at the beginning, so I want to. I noticed that at the beginning, when you showed the headings and stuff in that view, there was the title and then the H2. What is the difference between using a title as opposed to putting in an H1?
Right. So depending on factors, depending on primarily the theme, right? So the theme is where you're kind of deciding what code gets put there. What I found is most of the themes that I pay attention to, there's how many tens of thousands of themes, and I pay attention to 6. Uses the page title as the H1. And when you think about it, it's like everything is bound in the book of your website. The title of your document is again the title of the document. So it makes sense that it says this post is about build an accessible post demonstration. That is my H1. That is defining the document. And it's using the H1 as the title. So this is the whole, there should only be one H1 per page. I've heard, well, there are certain exceptions. I haven't come across a time when I need it. So did that answer the question? It's in effect, these are the H1 is equivalent. If you were to look at this on the back end, it would be H1.
Sounds good. Yeah, that was always like a confusing thing, especially for as a new beginner of doing the hierarchy of the headings and stuff.
I think, go ahead.
No, a couple of people were asking about the site that you were using, so we did put that into the chat again, so that I wanted to make sure that people got that.
The actual site I'm working on right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. This is live. This is my site. It is chock full. I mean, this is the funny part. So the links that I had go to this, this page is intentionally left blank because, I'm not building out the whole site, but I hope for encouragement for people who want to see this from a DIY practical approach. A big part of what I want to do are experiments. When I go through and test headings and how they work with different blocks and what's being read and not read and things like that. So I want to do a lot of that here. But right now, the main reason for this to exist is for this presentation, which is why these are the core links. You can now see the demonstration links are what we created. The post source content is what I was copying from, which should pretty much be the same thing right now.
Alice was asking about Astra and if it's an accessible template. Do you have any knowledge of Astra?
When I used Astra, I'm one of those who have the lifetime package. It was on one of my top lists of themes to use, and accessibility was key. I'll be honest, I haven't used it very recently, and I caught wind that there's a couple things to pay attention to. I think anything that exists, they'll work on and they're receptive to. So, if we want to, we're coming up on time, but I could even just swap in a theme and we can see what it looks like. But
we have several questions, so let's get through the questions first. Yeah. Anonymous is asked, I've heard that links that take place immediately before punctuation, like contact us, for example, with the words linking to a contact page, should include the punctuation in the link so that the screen reader pairs the information correctly, and doesn't read the punctuation. Is this accurate?
I'll be very honest with you. I do not know. I've never included the punctuation in the link.
If somebody could answer that in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, I've simply not heard that before. Yeah. But that's why what's beautiful about this is all about, you learn by doing, by teaching. Laura, you and I are doing that, where it's a great approach to things. So I leave a lot of this was prompted because Amber Hines herself was asking a question about tables and accessible tables. And another presentation I did, I kind of went through a process of how to make the WordPress core table accessible. The only problem was somebody called me on the fact that, yeah, but it doesn't work on a mobile phone. In other words, tables don't look good on a mobile phone, and there would be a whole process to go through for that, what you show is visible and not. So no time for that. That could be its own full presentation, which I'll probably do at some point.
Sherry was asking, and I think you answered this, if there is type in an image, will a screen reader not see it?
If
And
there,
you had the image of the WordPress accessibility,
yep,
and you had the words in the alt text.
correct. Yeah.
Because
So
it
you
won't-
want to make sure that if in this particular case, this has accessibility, advocate for equal access, and you want to include that in your alt text. Again, if I can read it on the screen, then, because it's part of an image, then it should be part of the alt text.
Let's see. This is from Anonymous. Is the skip to content part of the Cadence theme?
Yes.
How would you add that if it is not included?
Joel Dolson's plugin, WP Accessibility.
Okay.
He's got a nice, neat plugin. I was going to put it on the list. I simply didn't need it for what we were doing today, so I didn't want to throw it in. But he does. Built into that is the skip to content capability.
All right. Well, that is our time. Thank
Okay.
you for attending. Thank you, Peter.
You're
You
welcome.
can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11YDAY and hashtag WPAD2023. We also appreciate if you could go to 2023.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation, and can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. If you missed that link, it will be in the next set of slides as our intermission. Stay tuned for how to address accessibility and privacy to help avoid fines and lawsuits. Dun, dun, dun. Coming up with Donata and Hans, who I actually know too, so that's exciting, at the 2200 hour of UTC. 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors page to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win some great prizes. See you right here after the break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023 sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Equalize Digital. Equalize Digital's Accessibility Checker plugin is an automated accessibility scanning tool that helps WordPress websites become and stay accessible. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms is the professional form builder that you need to create beautiful, powerful, and accessible forms. Gold sponsors, 20i, DQ, Empire Caption Solutions, Pressable, and WP Engine. Silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, GoDaddy, Lone Rock Point, NerdPress, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, Riola Networks, A11Y Collective, and The Blogsmith. Bronze sponsors, Accessicart, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Hall Analysis SEO Consulting, HDC, ITX, IvyCat, MetaBox, Pixel Chefs, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Termageddon, Underrepresented in Tech, Weglot, and Yoast.